Hi, everyone. Welcome to Retire with Style. Wade and Alex here, and we're joined today by Dan Haylett, retirement coach and financial planner. He's the host of the Humans versus Retirement podcast, and he's also the author of the new book, The Retirement You Didn't See Coming, a guide to the human side of retirement that nobody warns you about. And in honor of having Dan on the show today, Alex wore his shirt, if you're watching on YouTube, same color as the book. It's you can't even see the book that Alex is holding, but I think you can see it on my side. Dan, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Wade, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I can't wait to have this conversation.
Well, wonderful. Yeah. And Alex, I mean, as we get started here, I think listeners of our podcast kind of recognize we tend to focus more on the financial side of retirement. We recognize the non-financial considerations are just as important. You actually quantify the idea that maybe the financial picture, it's about 30% of retirement planning, and your book's about the other 70%. So what are we talking about here? If it's not like, what's the safe withdrawal rate for retirement? What is the 70% of retirement that's not really related to one's finances?
Yeah, I think so. So for me, this is saying that the money is obviously vital, right? The money is important; it's foundational. But if you don't know what you're doing with the money, or if the money causes you issues psychologically or whatever, then all of the work that you've put into creating your plans and figuring out your safe withdrawal rate and figuring out the income strategy and and all of that hard work and brain power that has to go into doing that could be for not a lot, right? And I think I say in the book that, and I've said this a lot, that retirement to me is much more of a human problem than it is a maths problem. The math is important, but if we don't get those human elements right, then it feels to me that the planning can be a bit worthless. And that's come from a really early experience I had when I first became a financial planner, when I was very numbers orientated and I created, wonderful, robust financial plans. And I'd meet with people, and there was a couple of clients really early on that struck me. I met with them 6 months later, and you could see that they just weren't very happy. Their relationship with their spouse had changed. They weren't spending money. They felt anxious. They had lack of purpose. They hadn't really thought about what they were retiring to. And I thought to myself, gee, Dan, I've put all this work in. The team's put all this work in. We've done all this analysis. They've really brought into this, but they can't use their money for what they saved it for. So that really kicked off into it.
How long has Wade been a client of yours?
Ever since he come on series 1 of the podcast, and ever since then we're in, right?
It's like I was looking at a window into his soul.
I think it's so true of everyone, right? I mean, it's just like it's like I can't do cross-border stuff. I'm not allowed to touch you American people.
It's good tough. You don't, because in the US, I don't know if you know this, but on the flip side of the dollar bill, there are instructions. So it makes everything much easier. I don't know if you have that over there, but here we do. So it's
So listen, I think that's I think that the maths is important. I think my take on the 70-30 was just trying to say, well, I think the ratio's the wrong way around. I often see people go, I'm focusing on the numbers 70% of the time, and the 30% is just ignored a little bit.
I will say this: did you notice the irony of Wade, the numbers guy, asking you, how did you quantify that percent to be 70-30 and not like 60-40?
Well, right. Wait! I didn't build a spreadsheet to come to that equation. It's feel and heart, Wade, which I know sends shivers down your spine. But that
we can't publish that. We can't publish that. No peer review in the world will accept that paper.
Yeah, it's a MATLAB code for that one. But yeah, I mean, so maybe I think when you're talking in the book, though, part of it, people might not really recognize what's coming until they're in retirement, but maybe they can get a little preview of this. And I don't know if I'm the same as others, but just like sometimes you're on vacation, sometimes you're kind of ready to go back to work. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but is that kind of feeling? Is that what we're talking about? But there's a more permanent nature to it when you are retired, where suddenly, like you do mention the most dangerous day of retirement is kind of the day you wake up and start to think, is this all there is to it? Could you talk more about like what do people need to prepare for in terms of this human component of retirement?
And is it exactly 6 months to the day?
Well, yeah. Again, so
you quantified, Dan.
You picked another number that I have no scientific backing on either, so I can't like this. Yeah, thanks.
Who edited this book?
No. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, listen, I've called it day 182, right? And I mean, 6 months in, I'm trying to create this thing that says, day 182 can actually be day 1002, right? But it's a moment in time in your retirement that has no. Sorry, Wade, this is really horrible. You must be having a, but for me, this is kind of saying that, as you said, it quietly sneaks up. It's not necessarily this real massive moment in time that hits you, because I talk about the emotional journey around retirement shock and elation, and this kind of initial shock followed by honeymoon period, so to speak, right? We have this kind of permanent holiday feeling for a number of months, and then one day we wake up and go, is this it? And the dog's looking at you going, what are you doing in my house? You've kind of opened the fridge looking for inspiration, and all you've got is kind of Greek yogurt. And you think, what does this mean? Because there are, like my clients have said to me, there are 365 days in the year. And yes, holidays, vacations, and special things are part of it, but there's lots of other time to feel. And it feels like that what people do is that they have this kind of permanent vacation mindset to them, and everyday life just sneaks up on them quietly to get to a point where they go, gee, what does, time feels weird, and I don't really know what to do with it. And that's when they probably go and buy a camper van, or they want to go and find something that has a lanyard just to give them purpose again, right? That's where people go back to work, because it's all they've known, and they haven't really focused on, again, what they're retiring to. It's all kind of been a bit, let's sort the numbers out and what we're going to get, and we'll figure it out when we get there. But I think it's a real challenge for people, and that moment often hits everybody. It's just at certain points, that it might be later or earlier.
Yeah.
It seems pickleball hasn't taken off in on the other side of the pond.
It's getting bigger. Don't you worry about that. Paddle has really taken off over here, right?
You want time to go by, pick up a pickleball paddle. 3 hours later, hey,
yeah.
That's Alex's purpose. But yeah, I mean, so you talk a lot about the 5 pillars, and I think that's a useful way to really frame the conversation. What are the 5 pillars of retirement that people do need to anticipate and be thinking about, so that they have a way to kind of fill in for what's missing there?
Yeah, and I think, I've labelled these the 5 pillars of a thriving retirement. I think they probably could be the 5 pillars of a thriving life, right? I mean, this is, but I do think retirement heightens these pillars, and I'll name them and then tell you why: purpose, identity, relationship, structure, and well-being. And I think it heightens them because our job, our work, and our career has probably provided us with huge amounts of those pillars for a thriving life. Whether we like them, believe them or not, it's given us a lot of that. And therefore, when we do step back from work or retire fully, we go through this kind of grieving loss process of losing purpose, losing identity, losing and changing relationships, losing our structure, and also kind of really shining a light on some bad habits like our well-being. If we haven't taken care of ourselves or whatever that is, we've got more time to think about that. So yeah, purpose, identity, relationship, structure, and well-being are those 5 pillars that I think people really need to focus on. And money can be the bubble that sits around that, right? Because if you've developed safe withdrawal strategies, if you've saved well and intentionally, and you've got financial freedom, it now will allow you to explore those 5 things with more curiosity and more purpose, and figure out really what you want to do.
Is it fair to say money is sort of the oxygen in the room, but once you're in the room and you can breathe, now what? As opposed to you can sit in the corner all day and you'll drive yourself crazy, or you can kind of start to affect your milieu in a way that's productive or existentially satisfying, if you will. Is that about right?
100%. Absolutely.
Okay, then on that, something that we say, we have what's called a retirement income challenge, of all things, where during a week we take the time and I don't know, we take 500 people. It's amazing how many people subscribe to this and on a weekly basis join us and the like. But through the course of the week, we do the numbers. We teach everyone how to do it. We go through a financial plan with everyone where they do it themselves, and one-to-many approach, but it works extremely well. We do that, and towards the end, we do a piece on the softer side of retirement, which is effectively like this. We do our best, Dan Haylett, impersonation, if you will. And something that we speak about a lot is you don't retire from something, you retire into something. And I think here, when you say purpose, are you defining it as you had a purpose, now you need to find a new one? Or is it just, how does this same purpose manifest itself while you're in retirement, so you can kind of transition into it? And I know that there's that retirement dress rehearsal concept as well. How does that play into all of that?
Yeah, I think this is about what gives your day meaning and makes you want to pull back the duvet with some sort of kind of vigor. You want to pull back the duvet, kind of looking forward to what's ahead, and that for some people might be discovering brand new purposes, right? Leaving work behind that obviously give them a purpose to pull back the duvet, but may not have give their day the meaning. It also does apply to people that actually quite like their job. Maybe they like 50 to 60% of it. And part of their retirement plan is to do more of the stuff that they like that gives their day meaning. So maybe they decide to, drop down to a few days a week, or take a lesser role, or do some consulting based on the things that they really love doing. So it's not necessarily a replacement. I think this is the ability to go, what will give my day meaning, and what will allow me to have look forward to pulling back the duvet, and to allow me to want to enjoy that time. And I think, the best book I've read on this is Jordan Grummett's book, kind of The Purpose Code. And he talks a lot about big P purpose versus little p purpose. And I think that's the point for me. This is kind of, you don't have to set up foundations to save sea turtles. If you want to, great, there's a well worth the cause. But people think purpose is, I think, more up here. And this is just what gives you that feeling, what gives your day meaning. And for a lot of people that I've worked with, actually, when I've had those conversations, they haven't retired from work. They've just restructured their day and their work to give them more meaning. So they look forward to, the day ahead, rather than the rubbish that they have to deal with that they don't want to deal with anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And by the way, please save Crush from Finding Nemo. We haven't been able to see him in 10 years. We hope he comes back and is safe. I love that turtle. I love that damn turtle.
Yeah. That was when we went to Disneyland years ago. They've got the Crush kind of comes on and goes, yeah, man, like this. My little one would just stood there for I think she just stood there for days just watching him say it. She was obsessed by him. So it was brilliant.
He was last seen in the Florida Straits.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Let's hope for the best.
Yeah,
Let's hope for the best.
Yeah.
No, you're right. But what is little P and big P? Is that passion?
No, purpose. So little P purpose, big P purpose. Yeah. So again,
I think it's that, or what gets you up in the I think your point is that the big P purpose, the little P purpose, is just as important. You don't need to save the turtles necessarily, right?
No. And actually, I think where a lot of people struggle with this is, you said, what you're retiring into. That they often think that they need to retire into something that is much bigger and grander and different to what they've got. And in fact, it can be the smaller things that give people, much more purpose. Yeah.
Sorry. No, finish your thought.
No. Go.
Okay. Just because you said sometimes you can just work 40 hours, you could start turning down the volume of work that you do. Now, when you start doing that, I have to imagine in a corporation, and all I've known is McLean Asset Management, right? That's right out of grad school, and we're 30 people. We're not this huge, massive firm, and nor do we want to be. But I would imagine if you go down from full-time to part-time in a big organization, you're not going to have the same clout. You're not going to have your phone calls returned as quickly. Maybe people don't want to go 10 times in a row to Chipotle with you. That kind of thing. Is it as easy as just, okay, let me just work less? Because you're not going to have the same type of influence. At least I don't think. Right? I mean, does that really work?
Second pillar, right? Identity. So again, it's a thing here where you're going, that's why they're interlinked. I think there has to be some potential humble pie when it comes to this, and realize, that's why purpose is first, because I think purpose is the most important. But if at some point we need to let go of that importance around ourselves. If we've got, I don't know,
are you listening, Wade?
Yeah. So if the inbox is full and the calendar's full and people rely on you for stuff, if you want to try and, retire into a life of meaning, something that's a bit more foundational to you and more important, kind of who you are now that isn't your job is so important to try and figure out. And if you're not the most important person in the room, or you're not the person that everyone goes to because you're not there as much, that's a difficult transition, but a really essential one. And I think, in general, there's a bit of an identity crisis that goes on here. It's like we're always trying to establish, exactly who we are, and work has given us, an identity that we hang on to. Because when people, the first question, if you meet a stranger, is what's your name? The second question is what you do, and you answer it with your job title. One of the most challenging things I see for people is, and I'm quite nosy, I'll talk to people on holiday, much to the dismay of my wife. I'll just go up to people and just chat to them and bring them all over. And
sure.
But, if people are out, you go, what do you do? If they've retired, they often answer it, I used to be a. And so, you're never going to move forward if you're clinging on to the past effectively from that. So that's a massive challenge, to be able to get people to feel like they can, start to dial down their role and dial down their routine. But the one thing I've seen people do really well is take on a bit of a mentor type role for the last few years, where they, give back and they mentor and they teach someone to do some of the stuff that they've been doing, which allows them to step away. Because mentoring is a really, really rewarding part of, delivering your wisdom and knowledge to people and passing that on. And so I've seen that work really well as people start to transition in and start to let go of the job identity that's been fed to them for many years.
Have you thought about this yourself? Just your own personal?
Yeah.
Sort of
Yeah, massively. I mean, I think, what I'm conscious of, I don't want it to be like what I call a builder's house, right? If you go around a builder's house, they've got a really unfinished house because they concentrate on everyone else's house first, right? And it's kind of, So, I want to learn from this stuff. So I think deeply about who I am and, and trying to answer that question with not financial planner, retirement coach, podcaster. I struggle massively, right? I mean, I struggle massively, but I know it's essential work that we've got to start thinking about as we start to kind of move into a more meaningful life. Definitely.
No, I think it's interesting. And I asked you about yourself. I'm kind of in that realm as well. I'm like 52 right now. I'm nowhere near retirement, but I don't know, you turn 50 and you start thinking, okay, what's going on here? That kind of stuff. And even my role within the firm is changing, Wade as well. Where and it's kind of interesting in terms of role change, and then trying to, how do I ramp this so it's smooth for everyone, within the company, outside the company who we work with. It's something I'm even thinking about. You are, so, and you look more or less my age, so it's kind of it's one of these things that you don't need to be in retirement or 2 years away from retirement. It's starting to hit me. Wade's, I don't know, what are you, Wade, like 7 years younger than me? Have you ever contemplated like this kind of thing, or? Not really.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, in terms of careers, like maybe I've already passed my peak in terms of influence and such.
Oh,
and so
no,
downward trajectory.
No. Wait,
you've got at least another 3 books in you.
I'm going to leave the interview, Dan. We're going to stop recording, and why don't you and Wade have a conversation for another 30 minutes, and then ping me when you're ready to continue with this interview. Yeah. No, sorry, Wade, go on.
No, but I mean, as part of this, so I think it's starting to bubble up with purpose and identity, but maybe we need to be explicit, like what work did that retirement needs to replace. It's, work provides purpose for many people. It provides that identity. You've already talked about that. Also, the work relationships. It provides a source of relationships and also structure. Spending 8 hours a day in the office that is now needing to be filled in some other way. So could you just talk a little bit more about that idea that suddenly when we leave work, it may vary from person to person, but we're losing that source of purpose, identity, relationship, structure, potentially well-being, but maybe well-being's a little bit different in terms of leaving work.
That, I mean, we talked before we hit record about your internal battle about the 5 pillars and the retirement reinvention curve, right? They're kind of, and so I'm gonna play into Alex a little bit here by mentioning the retirement reinvention curve, because that piece of work that I did come about by coming across the Kubler-Ross change curve of grief and Riley Moynes' 4 phases of retirement. When I spoke to Riley, the YouTube star that he is, and when you look at the Kubler-Ross change curve of grief, that was developed by, as you probably know, 2 ladies, Mrs. Kubler and Mrs. Ross, don't know the first names. And that was looking at people's emotions.
I would say Elizabeth, but
I think it might have been, yeah. So that was developed to show the emotional journey that people go through when they lose someone, close to them, and that grief journey. And I looked at it, and I looked at the stages, and looked at the kind of text behind on the stage. I was like, my God, that looks like the journey that a lot of people go on when they leave stuff. So this kind of loss is a big thing. So when you lose something, you often go into some sort of grief mode. So that's kind of what I mapped across this journey. And if you look at I kind of go into like frustration and doubt is kind of the bottom of this emotional curve, and the bottom of the emotional curve in the Kubler-Ross one is depression. Right, that's the lowest ebb, and we are seeing stats, and some of them are disputed, but we're definitely seeing a trend that people in retirement are probably more likely to be diagnosed with depression, or maybe have certain tendencies to be depressed because they've lost so much, particularly if they've been hugely interwound into their career, and relationship, purpose and identity we've talked about, but relationships and structure. It is so profound because, the Harvard study and every other study that's done about relationships shows that they're one of the most important, if not the most important thing to a long and happy life. And a lot of our relationships, particularly for men, but men are rubbish at relationships. Women are much better, but particularly for men that have been at work, it might be a bit superficial. They might have good relationships, but they've been work relationships. And the number one challenge that the Harvard study found about retirees is replacing the social connections that work gave them. And so we know that relationships are massively important. We know that relationships change, particularly with maybe even your spouse or partner or your children. We know that, I've got clients that have kind of contacted their old work colleagues, and it's as if they never existed after a year, right? It's kind of like, people just move on. And it's really challenging because we know that, this isn't a solo sport, that, you need to be with people, speaking to people. And so you lose a lot of relationships, but what you've got to retire into is new relationships, new activities that develop a sense of camaraderie and connection with people that have similar interests to you. So that's really, really important. And I say to a lot of people that people in retirement, get younger friends as well, because you don't want all your friends to die off at the same time, right? Otherwise, that's really that's a lot of grief that you got.
You need someone to drive at night.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a thing while you were speaking, I was thinking about, because we're thinking about work and transitioning from work, but from a milestone perspective now, and maybe there's some Erickson thing here, or even some whatever developmental thing, but the reality is, when let's say you're retiring in your mid 60s and you're kind of doing the quote unquote normal sort of, you're hitting all your normal milestones. And normal, I'm just going to define it as more like most common denominator. That's my definition of normal, not anything other than that. Not a judgment on that. Let's say I'd be 65. My kids will start to be turning. They'll be 28, 29. Something like that, right? And so there's less for me to do as well, assuming that they're on track and all that. There's going to be less for me to do as a parent. And I'm experiencing that right now because my kids, I have twins. There's going to be sophomores now in the university, and I have one left who's a junior in high school, right? So I've got 2 more years that, I'm actually in the nest with somebody, right? That changes a lot. I've felt it right now, right? My role as a parent, not only your role as a professional, but your role as a parent is one in which you're just less hands off because, number one, you should be. They're their own people, but there's just less required, quote unquote, assuming they're on a normal path. And I think we focus a lot on the profession and you need to change your role, but your role as a parent changes significantly. And I'm curious if you've seen anything on that. Not that, the answer could be no, and that's fine. And I've never thought of it until you just said it, and, something spurred me on while you were speaking about that. Thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, relationships. So yeah, your relationship with your children will and does absolutely change as well during this, right? There's a really, really wonderful journalist here in the UK called Celia Dodd who wrote a book called, it's on my shelf there, called Not Fade Away. So a retirement book. And then her next book was called Empty Nesting. So when she wrote Not Fade Away and she come across these retirees that she was interviewing, one of the big challenges that she found is the change in relationship with their children. So she went and wrote a book called Empty Nesters to complement her work and said, well, actually, one of those big challenges is that loss of, I think it's called Empty Nesters. It's called, Empty Nesting, I think.
I'm still hung up on the Grateful Dead song.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but so I think it's, it's a massively crucial role because then they might go and have children and then you become, you become a granddad or a grandma or whatever that looks like. And that relationship then changes, right? I mean, your kids might start asking stuff of you to help them like babysit, right? And so, your relationship can massively change with them. And that can be a real struggle. You might have to go through the double whammy or treble, the trifecta of relationships where it's work relationships, your relationship with your spouse or partner, and the relationship with your kids can all dramatically change and transform in a really, really short space of time. And that's why for a lot of people that I work with, I get them to kind of have family meetings. I mean, I've sat here with couples and their kids before talking about then the new life that their mum and dad are planning and their dad's retiring and etc. And they wanted to kind of communicate what that means for them and etc. There might be a bit of gifting of money that they kind of, that goes in with that conversation as part of some tax planning and stuff. But, that's a really, really important part of retirement because, one of the things I talk about in the book is retirement isn't a solo sport. It's not just you. It affects a lot of people and impacts you in many ways that you wouldn't even think about.
So on that regard, a lot of the book, you have some great stories from folks in there, and we're talking about all these kinds of issues that can come up, and it almost sounded like in many cases there's an element of serendipity that suddenly, after reaching the bottom of the curve where they're kind of recognizing they don't know what they want to do, they suddenly get an idea that, oh, this is what's going to bring me purpose. Is there a way to really help facilitate that? Or how do you coach people on bringing that about in a manner that doesn't rely on random things popping into their minds? I don't know how to phrase the question exactly, but how do people find that sort of
from the equation? And
yeah.
Well, here's another thing, because while you were saying that, while we were speaking before, I had on my notes something to ask, and it's very similar. And this is another way of maybe asking the same question, which is, we have advisors and we have obviously consumers that listen to our podcast. Advisors, I would say, a number that I'm gonna just pull up, it's about 30%. And so people may be listening to this, and they'll pick up the book, if you will, The Retirement You Didn't See Coming. But how would they read this? How would you suggest they introduce this in a meeting, to sort of flesh this out? And let's say you're a consumer, an individual listening in, they have an advisor, they don't know how to bring this up, if you will. And so, because it's all number centric. And so, yeah, how does that begin? Because, as opposed to waiting for divine intervention, what's the way to maybe pull this out?
Yeah, I think it's like any, and I'm not saying that we are, as financial planners, therapists, and I'm not saying that people, that the public come to a financial planner for therapy, but it's like any good therapy or coaching. You should do it when things aren't broken, right? You should kind of recognize that there could be issues coming up, and we should talk about those and think about them and plan for them, or think of ways that we can avoid them. So I think if the public are listening to this, I think there's a sense of being brave about understanding, even if you feel wonderful at the moment, there is a possibility that at some point you're going to feel a bit lost. You're going to feel, you're going to feel like you're lost and losing stuff. You're going to feel uneasy and frustrated, and to start to kind of tackle those conversations or those subjects with a conversation is really brave and important. So I think just bringing it up and an understanding that this isn't a numbers thing, and and how do we then make sure that we're putting ourselves in a position that we can use the numbers for good, and identifying, as we said before, the purpose and identity, because we're spending our money, which is a whole new subject about how people struggle, but we're spending our money with intention that allows us to feel like we have got purpose, and relationships are good, and we're using our time wisely. So I think being brave and just bringing it up is probably a really, really important thing, and an understanding that if I'm not feeling it now, at some point I probably will. It's a bit like saying that the markets are wonderful at the moment, but we know that the markets at some point will challenge you and challenge your income strategy. We know at some point life and being a human will challenge you and challenge your life plan. So let's kind of, like we stress test and like we scenario plan our numbers, we can absolutely stress test and scenario plan some of these things. And a lot of people I speak to have got friends, family, that have been through something similar. You bring a story up about how this works. Like, oh yeah, my great uncle John kind of got really bad at one point, and didn't go out the house and didn't know what he was going to do. And then I go, oh, what did you observe about that then? And how did that make you feel? And and just kind of talking through their observations from people is a really good way to start to bring those stories to life and understanding. I think if you're a financial planner, it's almost flipping that again and saying the same thing. There's a recognition that these conversations are important, and we should start to want to open up these conversations to be able to feel like we are planning people's retirements with a life first, money second orientation, to make sure that we know that their money is going to support the life that they want, and introducing the concept to these people early on. I try and say to people that you're going to struggle to spend money, and I don't say in these words, and I don't say you're going to, you're going to have an identity crash in 6 months' time, but being honest with people about the patterns that we see and what challenges people, and almost giving them permission to feel like it, and a bit of a playbook if they start doing. And if you bring it up, they then have permission to give you a quick phone call and say, Dan, feel a bit like this at the moment. Can we have a quick chat about what's going on and all of this stuff? So, I think that to me would be, we don't need to train as therapists. We don't need to kind of think too deeply about it, in my opinion. We just need to be curious and open to having those conversations and understand it's so important.
That's one of the best answers I've ever heard. Really, I'm by training, I'm a clinical psychologist. I never practiced, but I trained for it, and I'm more of a researcher, if you will. And I always look at this side of the industry as kind of like, soft, if you will. And not like the soft science. I mean, just soft, like nothing really hefty, because a lot of them are this sort of rent a friend kind of approaches, which is kind of the antithesis of what you really want in therapy, as opposed to just helping them move along and get to a solution and then learn to deal with things themselves. I think the way you phrased it and the way you sort of gave people a blueprint for how to do it, as simple as that, I think it's it's a really good answer in my view, and I commend you for conveying it and for getting there. Really nice.
Thanks, appreciate it.
And wait, I've never said that before, right? You know me.
No, you never complimented a guest.
You're the best guest we've had on today, type thing.
It hit my heartstrings. No, it's true. I mean, that's the best you could do, right? That's the best you could do with the information you have, and it opens a door for them to open up in the future, and vice versa.